The night he found her, the cold was no longer just a season. It was a violent thing that clawed at skin and stole breath, turning every sound brittle and sharp, and he would later swear the silence itself seemed angry, as if the world had decided no one deserved warmth anymore, least of all the woman curled against the frozen wall near the abandoned bus stop, knees pulled tight to her chest, fingers blue, lips trembling, whispering apologies to a world that never answered her back. And he almost walked past her because the city had taught him to keep moving, to mind his own business, to believe that stopping was dangerous. But something in the way she shivered, small, involuntary, like a bird trying not to die, reached into him and dragged him back, forced his boots to slow, his breath to hitch, because this wasn't the dramatic kind of suffering people photograph or talk about later. This was quiet and invisible, the kind that disappears without witnesses. And when he finally turned, the streetlight flickered above them, casting long shadows that made her look even smaller, almost unreal, as if she might vanish if he blinked too long. And when he asked gently if she was okay, she didn't answer, just hugged herself tighter as if his voice might break her. And that was when he noticed the frost dusting her hair, the cheap jacket that was never meant for a night like this, the shoes soaked through with melted ice, and the fear, not the obvious kind. Not panic, but the exhausted kind that settles in when hope has been disappointed too, many times to bother rising again. And something in his chest cracked open because he recognized that look, not from the streets but from memories he kept locked away. Memories of being small and cold and invisible in a house that never felt like a home. And he cleared his throat and tried again, softer this time, saying he had a coat, that there was a cafe still open a block away, that she didn't have to answer if she didn't want to. And at that she finally lifted her eyes, slow and wary, and for a second he wondered if this had been a mistake, because her gaze held nothing, no gratitude, no distrust, just a deep, hollow acceptance of whatever happened next, as if she had already agreed with the universe, that she didn't matter enough for it to change. And she shook her head, a tiny movement that seemed to cost her more energy than it should have, and whispered that she was fine, even as her teeth chattered hard enough to betray the lie. And the word fine nearly undid him because it was the same lie everyone used when they were running on nothing. And he crouched down so he wouldn't tower over her, pulled off his coat despite the cold biting instantly through his shirt, and draped it around her shoulders. And she flinched at the first touch, not dramatic, just reflexive, like someone used to bracing for impact. And he froze, apologized immediately, told her he didn't mean to scare her, and something shifted then, just a fraction, because no one ever apologized to her first. And she didn't say thank you, but she didn't pull away either. And that felt like a fragile victory. And as the fabric settled around her, warmth began to creep back into her hands, and with it tears she clearly hated, because she wiped at them angrily, muttering that she didn't need help, that she just needed to rest, that she'd be gone by morning. And he wanted to ask gone where, but didn't, because the answer didn't matter as much as the right now. And he asked her name, offering his own so it wouldn't feel like an interrogation. And she hesitated before giving it, voice hoarse like she hadn't used it much lately, and when he repeated it back, carefully to show he'd heard, her shoulders sagged the tiniest bit, as if carrying her name alone had been a burden she was tired of holding, and the wind cut louder then, forcing a groan from the metal bench beside them, and he realized staying here was no longer an option because the cold was winning and she didn't have the strength to fight it anymore. And that was when he leaned in, lowering his voice so it wouldn't be stolen by the night, and whispered the words that would later echo in her mind for years, not because they were dramatic or poetic, but because they were simple and absolute. You don't have to survive this alone. And she inhaled sharply at that, like someone who had been underwater too long and finally broke the surface, and her eyes filled again, this time openly, and she shook her head weakly, whispering that people always said things like that and always left, that kindness came with conditions, that she couldn't afford to believe him. And he didn't argue, didn't promise the future, didn't swear forever because he knew how empty those words sounded in the cold. And instead he whispered again, closer this time, the steam of his breath mingling with hers. Then don't believe in me, just believe in the next 10 minutes. And something in that landed. Not hope exactly, but permission. And she nodded once, barely, and let him help her stand, her legs unsteady, weight light against his arm, in a way that scared him because no one should feel this fragile. And they took slow steps down the street together, past shuttered shops and unread posters, each footfall feeling like a small rebellion against the night. And as they walked, she began to talk, not in a rush, not spilling her life story, but in pieces, fragments that slipped out when she wasn't guarding them, about how people stopped seeing you once you fell far enough, about how cold changed the way time worked, stretching minutes into hours, about how being untouched for too long made even kindness feel painful at first. And he listened without interrupting, without fixing, because he sensed that what she needed most was proof she was real, that her words still landed somewhere. And when they finally reached the cafe, warm air rushed out as the door opened and he felt her flinch, again overwhelmed by the sudden contrast, and he guided her to a seat near the heater, ordered soup and tea without asking because tonight, decision-making felt like another impossible weight. And when the bowl was set in front of her, she stared at it like it might disappear if she trusted it too much, and held the spoon with shaking hands. And when she finally took the first sip, color bloomed slowly back into her face and she let out a sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. And he realized then that survival wasn't loud or heroic, it was quiet and deeply human, happening one warm mouthful at a time. And as the cafe hummed softly around them, he told her she could stay as long as she wanted, that there was no rush. And before he could stop himself, he added that if she needed somewhere safe to sleep, he knew a shelter nearby that actually treated people like people. And she looked up at him sharply at that, suspicion flaring, because trust never came without questions. And he met her gaze steadily and whispered again, the same calm certainty, no matter what you decide next, tonight doesn't erase you. And she stared at him for a long moment, and something irreversible shifted inside her, because no one had ever acknowledged her existence with such quiet refusal to let her disappear. And in that moment, warmth seeping into her bones, the cold finally loosening its grip, she realized the night hadn't ended her story. It had cracked it open, and she didn't know yet what came next, didn't know how much pain or healing waited beyond this hour. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt the smallest spark of something dangerous and beautiful begin to glow. And as the scene softens here, if this moment stirred something in you, if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel, because Chapter 2 will show you just how much one whispered act of kindness can rewrite an entire life.